Thanks for coming. Couple comments initially. Since I am an active intelligence officer, I have to keep this on all the time. So I hope we don't get interrupted in the next half hour or so, but I can never control that. Most of you folks, if you know me as the guy who writes the column in the Star and Wave about Victorian things, or perhaps the fellow who was for 25 years the museum education director for the Mid-Atlantic Center for the Arts, or as they call it now, Cape May Mac, and portrayed Dr. Physic for those 25 years. In fact, when I walk the promenade today, more people still call me Dr. Physic than Dr. Heinly. But they were supposed to be hobbies. I was supposed to be retiring and do that. In my real life, I was a college professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and also an active, and still am, naval intelligence officer with the rank of commander. I was recruited in 1965 right out of, or during one of my doctoral programs, by a college professor who noted that because of football injuries, I was 4F, but I had almost all the other qualifications for an intelligence officer. I was recruited to do think tank geopolitical work, not field, okay? My kids and my grandkids now say, "Oh, Pappy, were you James Bond?" No, nothing like that. I was recruited initially for the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, which works almost indistinguishably with naval intelligence. Now, what were those qualifications, you may ask? Well, obviously, and I don't mean to be braggadocious, but you have to be pretty smart. You have to have a pretty high IQ, very high, actually. You have to be intensely patriotic, John Wayne-ish, if you will. But there are two other very important things that distinguish, there are a lot of people with those qualifications. But you also have to have street smarts. I grew up on the streets of Philadelphia in a charitably lower middle class family. I had street smarts. And then also, you have to have the psychological makeup to cope with the fact that in the course of your work, it's a different mindset than actual combat, but you are going to directly or indirectly recommend the deaths of many people, some of which will be your own people. And obviously we have to try to minimize that latter category. Well, it was found out that I still had that. I first became a specialist in the Soviet Union. Then I became a specialist in Islamic cultures and then Chinese cultures, Chi Com in particular. One of the things that we did that I thought you would find interesting, you're probably vaguely familiar with the concept of playing war games with moving tanks and ships and troops. Well, we play geopolitical war games too. And among other things, while I still do teach at Annapolis and the Naval War College and the Naval Postgraduate School, we play war games. Geopolitical war games. I have some bad news for you. Well, good news for the Naval Academy. I'm their coach, and after the first year, winners get to play, and which side we want. We're always the aggressor force. We win 95% of the time. You know why? We lie, cheat, and don't play by the rules. It's not an even playing field. And guess what? That's a reflection of the real world that these young people are going to have to deal with. Because the real world is that. Totalitarian countries have an inherent advantage in any conflict because of just that. They lie, cheat, and steal. We have to play by the rules and go through all these complicated democratic processes. So thus the fact, it's not that we're especially more brilliant or they're more brilliant than we are. It's that we have to play by the rules and they don't. Well, oftentimes when we win, we don't play by the rules. And that's what I teach them to do. I also teach them how to think like a Chinese, like an Islamist extremist, and like a Soviet or a Russian. I'm also now in the process of trying to teach them to replace me because I can't be around forever.
Good luck with that.
I began my career in the aftermath, just to put it in some kind of context for you, of the Bay and Pigs invasion, the Cuban Missile Crisis, increasing protests against the Vietnam War, and the Gulf of Tonkin incident. As I mentioned, I am now in the process of working mainly with postgraduate, but some undergraduate, aspiring naval intelligence officers to basically replace me. And sadly, there are increasingly few of my generation with the experience-based expertise that I have to do that job. I'm very thankful to God that God has granted me this longevity. I figure I do some bad things to bad people every once in a while, or cause them to happen. But God must be pretty pleased because he's granted me a lot of longevity to do it, you know? Well, back to myself. I was quickly given the rank of Commander 05 in the Navy. And those of you in any armed service will appreciate why. The wisdom of the military. Whenever we were active, and it used to be only out of country, sadly now it's in country too, we are guarded by a detachment of some of the toughest, since we're naval, toughest Marines you ever want to meet. Usually commanded by a gunny sergeant who looks somewhat like Clint Eastwood in Heartbreak Ridge, you know? Although, ladies, you would be interested, an increasing number of them are female, and they are as tough and vicious as any of them that you want to deal with. I feel very, very safe. Well, the reason why I was given the rank of commander was that I had to outrank that gunny sergeant in the wisdom of the military. So I ranked him. Well, I would immediately, and it was very hard for me, especially as a young guy, and this guy had like 20 some years on me at this point, to give this guy orders. And I would say to him, they were always, yes sir, saluting me and all, and I said, you don't have to do that, you know, it's not, oh no, yes sir. So I kind of gave up that fight. I said to them, Sergeant, I've told my people, and usually we're a group of 7 to 9, always an odd number so we reach a conclusion, that anything that comes from your lips are to be considered coming from mine. If a problem breaks out, after you suppress it, and I know you will, you're immediately to come to me and tell me what I ordered you to do. You could see just like in some of the gleam in some of your eyes, you could see the gleam in this guy's eyes. This guy's get it. This guy gets it. Some of my civilian counterparts with other similar groups, and there were many, still are, the military rank goes to their head a little bit, they don't quite get it. Well, I started with President Johnson and then Nixon, and have served under all of them. Just to give you context, during my initial service, William Westmoreland was in command of American forces in Vietnam. He was followed by Clinton Abrams in 1968. The Secretaries of State were Dean Rusk and then William Rogers, names from the past. Secretaries of Defense, Robert McNamara and then Melvin Laird. Those changes once Nixon became president. As with all intel people throughout history, we have a classic dilemma. Do we tell them what they should hear or what they want to hear? And that is indeed a dilemma, especially for lifetime military people whose career are on the line. If I tell them what they should hear and it's not what they want to hear, and during Vietnam most of the time it was, they didn't want to hear it, I go back to being a college professor. Doesn't bother me that much, but the guys who are career military, they got to worry about their careers. So, a little bit about what did we advise in Vietnam. A, and this I inherited from my predecessors, don't get involved in this war in the first place. Learn from what happened to the French. Remember, most of your friends from. Realize that in Vietnam, just like the French, we are playing the role of the British in the American Revolution. How did that turn out? Ho Chi Minh was basically the George Washington of Indochina. Also, we can't win a guerrilla war in the jungles of Southeast Asia short of using our nuclear superiority. Okay? Therefore, we will and did constantly handicap our troops of all types by limiting their rules of engagement. It drove we intel people nuts. And it was all for political reasons. You have to remember that basically in Vietnam, the United States wanted to erase the shame of what happened in Korea. Remember, we had a similar conflict, and that didn't work out very well either. Both of these were part of our overall global strategy of containment of communism during the Cold War. Actually, containment didn't beat the Soviet Union. We beat the Soviet Union by bankrupting them, using that kind of thing. And very successfully. Most of that happened, well, that's a whole other story. I don't want to get into that. Additional handicap in Vietnam. The Indo-Chinese had little concept of nationalism. Their loyalties were primarily to their tribes and religions, and we didn't understand that. Westerners think nationalism. It's the same thing, if I can digress a minute, when you're dealing with Islamist extremists. We underestimate the importance of religion in everything they do, because we live in an increasingly secular society, so religious factors for many of us aren't as important. To them, certainly to Islamists, it's the driving thing that drives everything they do, and it was very important to the Indo-Chinese as well. Then, sadly, the South Vietnamese were even more corrupt than the South Korean government was. Ngo Dinh Diem was a totally corrupt and unpopular leader in South Vietnam. Eventually, so bad that the U.S. led a coup which overthrew and replaced him in 1963, before I got there. Unfortunately, his replacement was another equally corrupt member of his family. Contrast that to the Viet Cong, Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, and Pathet Lao in Laos. They're all very dedicated, loyal to their cause, and they know how to fight guerrilla warfare in a jungle. Talk about the odds being against our folks. As the war progressed, American politicians, primarily the Johnson administration, and don't get me started on Lyndon Johnson, the Johnson administration kept doing the opposite of what most intel people advised them to do for political reasons. I mentioned getting involved in the war in the first place. They restricted our rules of engagement. They used Agent Orange, which we said, are you nuts? It's not going to evaporate. Who's going to follow up if it indeed it even does work? All of these politically motivated actions created terrible public relations back home for an already hostile press who was against the war in the first place. Examples. Tet in 1968 was a military victory, but our press turned it into a disaster and made everybody thought we lost. We didn't. 1969, the Hue massacre was actually a Viet Cong atrocity, not an American atrocity, but it was misrepresented in the American press as that. And American atrocities, much more minor, were played up. There are always, in any war, there always will be what the military and intel jointly call collateral damage. It's just inevitable. There always has been, always will be. But it's a powerful PR weapon. Then, of course, there was the Kent State massacre in 1970. You're familiar with it, so I don't have to That would have never happened today. You don't send young, inexperienced National Guardsmen with no experience whatsoever in dealing with riot situations into a situation like that. One of them got trigger happy, reacted quite normally in some ways, but it was a PR disaster. We see many potential Kent states going on almost weekly in the news. But now we know how to deal with them. Back then, no. Well, another major disastrous spinoff from Vietnam, the Vietnam fiasco, as I like to call it. It resulted in the ruination of American colleges and most of our media, and making many of our leaders currently in the United States what Marxists, Leninists would call useful idiots. Useful idiots are people that don't know really what they're doing. They use them they're well-intentioned, but they use them for their own corrupt reasons, and then later they're among the first people that are killed once the communists take over. But that's a whole other story. I'll get into why did it ruin our colleges and universities. Well, people my age, actually a little younger than me, had these choices in Vietnam. We could wait to be drafted. We could volunteer. Okay. Or we could flee to Canada. Or we could stay in college and forever get educational deferments. A number of our leftist thinking people of my generation stayed in college. Then they stayed in graduate school. Then they became members of the faculty. Then they became deans of schools. And all the time, all they ever did, and I saw this happen at the University of Pennsylvania, all they ever did were hire like-thinking people to follow them, so that within 10 to 20 years, the entire faculty was very leftist, to put it mildly, in their thinking. They in turn indoctrinated their students with that kind of thinking. Prior to that time, American colleges and universities had been bastions of patriotism and traditional American values prior to Vietnam. Ever since, well, I don't have to share, you know, not so. And sadly, the same thing happened. Some of my clergy friends tell me exactly the same process happened in seminaries. And we have the result today. We're still feeling that impact. Most of our media is certainly leftist. Most of the major leaders who come out of these prestigious schools in industry, in tech, in any other field you want to name are leftist trained and leaning. Now, this sounds very pessimistic, doesn't it? Well, no, I don't think so. What I'm picking up both professionally and personally, I see the ascendancy in this country of a whole new type of thinking, a whole new type of action. is typical of pendulum swings, and in this case, the left has swung way too far until people have finally now started to awaken to it. And I'm actually very optimistic about the future. I'm very optimistic that even though the Chinese are by far the most brilliant adversary that I have ever dealt with, that we will eventually beat them. For example, the Russians were a piece of cake. And they still are. They're very brutish in their thinking and therefore very predictable. The Islamists are only dangerous because of their religious fanaticism, and that makes them willing to die. Whereas the Russians would prefer not to die, and the Chinese would prefer not to die. The Islamists, you got to be very careful with them because they think they're on their way, if you'll recall their religion, to 7 virgins in heaven, or no, it's 77, they multiplied it, 77 virgins in heaven and things like that. So they're tough to deal with. But I think we'll deal with the other ones. I think the country is swinging back. The pendulum is swinging back. And as part of that swinging back, I certainly hope that we will do everything that we can to make amends to our Vietnam veterans for the shameful way in which they were treated when they returned home. Not me. Nobody knew I was there. Nobody knew I came back. I'm talking about the ones who actually saw combat. And you know that detestable story. While enough of them are still alive, we need to do everything that we can to make amends for them. I don't know whether it ever will totally be done or not, but we certainly have to try. This museum is one way to do that. Supporting this museum is one way to do that. I certainly intend to do it, and I urge everyone present to do the same thing. And now I'll take any questions and answer them if I'm allowed to. Yes, ma'am.
All right.
You have to be real loud, even with my hearing aid.
Because I wasn't able to be a nurse to serve my country. I'm told even now, at my age, elderly, very elderly, I could serve my country. How can I do that?
Mainly volunteering, even if it's not in the medical field. Places like this, places like the museum across the street. I'm there 3 days a week with that longest yarn.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe most importantly, figure out ways that you can mentor younger people. You have immense experience-based expertise in the medical field, like I have in my fields. We are obligated. We were given those skills and abilities, in my opinion, by God. We are obligated to pass them on as long as we can. That's what I intend to do.
My frustration is most of my friends who are very affluent are all liberal.
Yes, they're the very people I just talked about that graduated from those schools.
And how do you fight them?
You don't. They're beyond help. I'm sorry, they're beyond help. Currently, if you believe the last election results, they represent at best 30% of the country. And if they keep doing the things that they've been doing, that 30%, it'll be even less. So you just don't let them ruin your life. Any other questions?
Afghanistan.
Thank you very much, folks, and it has been a pleasure and a privilege to talk with you. If you have any individual questions, I'll be sitting over by the side here for a while. I'm probably going back and enjoying some of the munchies back there, and we can chat individually. Thank you very much.
I think I would like to make.
And my phone didn't go off. So the world is safe for democracy,
That's a good thing.
temporarily.